Welcome to the Brics News. Explore how the Brics alliance is transforming the India-China relationship from historical ties to present-day diplomacy. In this comprehensive analysis, we dive deep into the evolution of India-China relations, starting from ancient cultural connections, post-independence support, the tensions of the 1959 to 1962 era, and the Galwan Valley conflict in 2020. Learn how external forces like British colonialism and Western policies of divide and rule have contributed to conflicts between these two Asian powers. This video also examines how Brics has become a crucial platform for India and China to resolve border issues, foster economic collaboration, and resist Western influence. With increasing Western pressure on India over its ties with Russia and Iran, and the rising discontent with US-led NATO hypocrisy, this analysis reveals why India and China are finding common ground, what this means for the global order, and how it signals the decline of Western hegemony. Join us as we explore the future of global power dynamics and the role of Brics in shaping a new multipolar world order. Topics covered: historical ties between India and China, British and Western divide and rule policies, the 1962 Sino-Indian War, and the Galwan Valley conflict, Brics as a platform for India-China cooperation, the decline of Western economic and military dominance, US pressure on India regarding Russia, Iran, and the Quad, the future of India-China relations, and global geopolitics. Please like the video, subscribe to us to support our journey so that we can keep you informed about geopolitical issues. Let's start. Watch till the end. How Brics Union is bringing India and China together, historical ties, conflict, and the path to reconciliation. Introduction. India-China relations within Brics. In the contemporary global order, the Brics, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, alliance has become a significant platform for the geopolitical and economic realignment of major emerging economies. Among the Brics nations, the relationship between India and China remains critical. While they have had historical frictions, especially concerning border disputes, the Brics platform has emerged as a venue for fostering dialogue and cooperation between the two Asian giants. This article explores the complex history of India-China relations, the conflicts fueled by external influences, and how the Brics Union is playing a vital role in bringing the two countries closer. Historical foundations of India-China friendship. India and China share a rich tapestry of historical interactions, stretching back over 2,000 years. The ancient Silk Road facilitated not only trade, but also cultural and religious exchanges, with Buddhism traveling from India to China. These centuries-old ties laid the foundation for a sense of civilizational camaraderie. The influence of Buddhism. One of the most important links between India and China historically is the spread of Buddhism. Chinese scholars like Xuanzang traveled to India in the 7th century to collect scriptures, which strengthened religious and cultural bonds between the two nations. Mutual respect for civilizations. India and China were two of the most advanced civilizations in the ancient world, contributing significantly to human knowledge in the fields of science, medicine, astronomy, and literature. This historical admiration has, to some extent, always been a bedrock for diplomatic and cultural exchanges. Post-independence relations, from friendship to tensions. After gaining independence, India and China initially enjoyed a cordial relationship, often hailed as a symbol of Asian solidarity against colonialism and imperialism. The early years of post-colonial diplomacy saw India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai striving to build a partnership based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, Panchsheel. The Bandung Conference, 1955. This was a critical moment in post-colonial Asian diplomacy. The Afro-Asian solidarity expressed at this conference provided a platform for leaders of newly independent nations like Nehru and Zhou to engage in dialogue, emphasizing mutual respect and sovereignty. However, this honeymoon period did not last long, as unresolved border issues soon turned into major points of contention. The 1959 to 1962 era, border disputes and war. The seeds of the 1962 Sino-Indian War were planted in the late 1950s, mainly due to disagreements over their long and disputed border, which was a remnant of colonial-era cartographic ambiguity. Tibetan Uprising, 1959. Tensions escalated when the Dalai Lama fled to India following the Tibetan Uprising against Chinese rule. India's granting of asylum to the Dalai Lama was viewed by China as a direct affront to its territorial sovereignty. This incident significantly strained bilateral relations. The 1962 war. The territorial dispute over the Aksai Chin region, which China controlled but India claimed, led to a brief yet intense border war in 1962. The war was a humiliating defeat for India, leading to a complete breakdown in bilateral relations. The conflict set the stage for decades of mistrust and sporadic skirmishes along the border. External influences. The role of the British and Western divide and rule policies. The roots of the India-China border dispute can be traced back to British colonialism. The arbitrary boundaries drawn by British surveyors, most notably the McMahon Line, which delineates the eastern border between India and Tibet, created lasting uncertainties. British manipulation of borders. The British Empire deliberately sowed seeds of discord in Asia as part of its divide and rule policy. By creating vague and contested borders, particularly in the Himalayan region, the British left a legacy of confusion that continues to haunt India-China relations. Western involvement in Indo-China relations. In the post-independence era, Western powers, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, played a role in exacerbating tensions between India and China. Both countries were emerging powers in the Cold War context, with India aligning with the Soviet Union for military support and China facing Western containment efforts, especially after the Korean War. The long freeze and the Cold War context. After the 1962 war, India and China's relations remained frozen for decades. Both nations were embroiled in Cold War alliances, India with the Soviet Union and China with the US, after Nixon's rapprochement with Beijing. During this period, both countries pursued their own regional goals. India focused on economic development and building stronger ties with the Soviet Union, while China concentrated on its internal development under Mao Zedong and the eventual economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping. Diplomatic engagement between the two was minimal, and border issues remained unresolved. The 2020 Galwan Valley conflict. A modern flashpoint. In June 2020, the Galwan Valley, situated along the line of actual control in the Himalayas, became a flashpoint for renewed tensions between India and China. Clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and an undisclosed number of Chinese casualties. This incident was the worst border clash between the two nations in nearly 60 years. Several factors contributed to the 2020 conflict, including China's increased infrastructure development in disputed areas, India's strategic partnerships with the West, and China's growing military assertiveness in the region. The situation brought India-China relations to a low point, and concerns of a full-scale war emerged. However, despite the Galwan incident, there has been a gradual thaw in relations, particularly due to the pragmatic diplomacy necessitated by Brics. The Brics platform, a path toward reconciliation. Brics has played a key role in softening the antagonistic stance between India and China. While both nations continue to have disagreements, the forum offers a space for constructive dialogue and economic collaboration, which is in both countries' long-term strategic interest. India and China, both major economies, share common ground in their desire to reform global financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which are seen as Western-dominated. The new development bank, established by Brics, serves as an alternative to these institutions, reducing dependence on Western-controlled financial systems. Through Brics, India and China have been able to shift the focus from their bilateral disputes to broader multilateral issues, such as global governance, climate change, and sustainable development. The collaboration within Brics emphasizes that their rivalry can be balanced by common global interests. Both India and China see Brics as a counterbalance to Western dominance in global political and economic affairs. Their shared grievances against Western powers, particularly the United States, have aligned their interests on several fronts. This includes opposition to the dominance of the US dollar in global trade, as Brics nations have discussed establishing alternative payment systems to reduce reliance on the dollar. The role of the West: creating conflicts to maintain dominance. Historically, Western powers have pursued a strategy of divide and rule in Asia, a policy that continues to influence India-China relations. Western nations, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, have exploited tensions between India and China to further their own geopolitical interests. The United States has actively promoted the quadrilateral security dialogue, which includes India, Japan, Australia, and the US, as a strategic alliance to counterbalance China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. However, this has placed India in a difficult position, as it must balance its participation in the Quad with its interest in maintaining stable relations with China through forums like Brics. India has faced pressure from the United States over its long-standing ties with Iran and Russia, two countries that are critical for India's energy security and military hardware supplies, respectively. This pressure has driven India to reconsider its Western alignment, leading to a greater emphasis on partnerships within Brics, where both China and Russia hold significant sway. The West's continued marginalization of India and China in global institutions, despite their growing economic and geopolitical power, has fostered resentment. India, in particular, has criticized the United States and Europe for their hypocrisy on issues such as human rights and climate change. Chinese officials, too, have pointed out the West's double standards when it comes to military interventions and economic sanctions. Current developments: diplomatic efforts to resolve border issues. In recent years, there has been a concerted effort by both India and China to resolve their long-standing border disputes. Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's recent statement that the border issue is 75% solved indicates that progress is being made despite the ongoing complexities. The role of high-level talks. Both nations have engaged in multiple rounds of military and diplomatic talks since the Galwan clash. These dialogues have prevented further escalation and have been crucial in maintaining stability along the LAC. Border resolution through Brics. While Brics is not directly involved in border negotiations, the spirit of cooperation fostered by the forum has indirectly contributed to easing tensions. The focus on economic cooperation and global governance reforms has encouraged both India and China to seek peaceful resolutions to their bilateral issues. Western decline: what it means for India, China, and global geopolitics. The ongoing decline of Western economic and military hegemony is reshaping global geopolitics. The Ukraine crisis and Western decline. The Ukraine war has revealed the limitations of Western influence, particularly the US and its NATO allies. Despite imposing severe economic sanctions on Russia, the West has struggled to curb Moscow's geopolitical ambitions. The sanctions have inadvertently caused energy crises and inflation in Europe, while Russia has pivoted to non-Western alliances, further strengthening its ties with China, India, and other Brics nations. Impact of the Ukraine crisis on India and China. The Ukraine conflict has also acted as a litmus test for India and China's foreign policy stances. Both nations have maintained a neutral position, avoiding direct criticism of Russia while urging diplomacy. India, which relies heavily on Russian military equipment and energy, has refused to bow to Western pressure to cut ties with Moscow. China, too, has found an ally in Russia against the West's geopolitical ambitions, particularly in countering NATO's influence. These shared positions have deepened the convergence of India and China's broader foreign policy outlooks within forums like Brics. US pressure on India, Iran, Russia, and the Quad. The US has exerted significant pressure on India to fall in line with its global agenda, particularly concerning sanctions on Russia and its relations with Iran. However, India's pragmatic foreign policy, which champions strategic autonomy, has resisted such pressure. This has led India to seek stronger alliances in multilateral forums like Brics, where it can engage with other major powers like China and Russia without compromising its strategic interests. Iran and India's strategic importance. Iran has been a key partner for India, both for its energy needs and for its strategic location in facilitating access to Central Asia through projects like the Chabahar port. US pressure on India to reduce its engagements with Iran has been met with resistance, with India emphasizing its need for energy security and regional stability. The Quad dilemma. While India's involvement in the Quad, alongside the US, Japan, and Australia, is aimed at countering China's influence in the Indo-Pacific, India has carefully balanced this with its engagement in Brics. India is wary of being perceived as part of an anti-China military alliance, particularly as it works to resolve its border disputes with China through diplomatic channels. The Quad, while important for India's maritime strategy, is not a substitute for the more inclusive and multipolar approach represented by Brics. Brics. As a counterbalance to Western hegemony. The Brics alliance has become a symbol of resistance to Western dominance in global politics and economics. Both India and China have used the platform to push for reforms in international institutions like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which have historically been controlled by Western powers. One of the significant achievements of Brics has been the establishment of the New Development Bank, which provides an alternative to Western-dominated financial institutions. The NDB offers financing for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in Brics countries and other emerging economies, reducing reliance on Western capital markets and the conditionalities that come with it. Brics countries have discussed reducing reliance on the US dollar for international trade. Both China and India have been actively exploring alternative payment systems, including using their own currencies for trade. This de-dollarization strategy is seen as a way to reduce vulnerability to US sanctions and economic pressure, further aligning India and China's economic interests. Western hypocrisy on human rights and geopolitics. One of the key factors bringing India and China closer together in Brics is their shared critique of Western double standards on human rights and international law. Both nations have pointed out the hypocrisy of the US and its allies, who lecture others on human rights while engaging in military interventions and violations of sovereignty across the world. China and India have long criticized the US-led NATO for its military interventions in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. These interventions, often justified under the guise of promoting democracy or protecting human rights, have led to massive destabilization, civilian casualties, and long-term conflicts in these regions. Both India and China have emphasized the importance of respecting national sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs, principles enshrined in the Brics agenda. Indian and Chinese leaders have also called out the US for its own human rights record, particularly in relation to its treatment of minority communities, its prison system, and its military's actions abroad. For instance, during the 2023 Brics Summit, Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar highlighted the double standards of the West in lecturing other nations on human rights while ignoring the structural inequalities and racial injustices within their own societies. The rebuilding of India-China relations toward a strategic partnership. Despite their historical and ongoing conflicts, India and China have been steadily working toward a more pragmatic relationship, driven by their shared economic and geopolitical interests. The recent statement by Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar that the border issue is 75% solved indicates significant progress in one of the most contentious areas of their bilateral relationship. High-level dialogues and agreements. Over the past few years, high-level military and diplomatic talks between India and China have been instrumental in preventing further escalation along the line of actual control. Both countries have agreed to disengage in certain conflict zones and have reaffirmed their commitment to maintaining peace and stability along the border. Economic cooperation. Beyond their territorial disputes, India and China recognize the immense potential of economic cooperation. China is India's largest trading partner, and despite the border tensions, bilateral trade between the two nations reached record highs in recent years. Both countries are working to expand their economic ties, particularly in areas like technology, infrastructure and renewable energy, which are key priorities within the Brics framework. A new era of India-China cooperation? While it is too early to declare a full-fledged partnership between India and China, the recent developments suggest a more nuanced and cooperative relationship. Both nations understand that their future economic and geopolitical aspirations cannot be fully realized in isolation or perpetual conflict. Through Brics and other multilateral platforms, India and China are finding ways to manage their differences while collaborating on global issues like climate change, economic inequality, and the reform of international institutions. The decline of the Western economic and military model. As India and China grow closer through forums like Brics, the decline of the Western-led economic and military model becomes more apparent. The economic crises facing Europe, particularly the UK's near bankruptcy, widespread homelessness in the US, and Germany's recession, are signs of a Western world struggling to maintain its post-World War II dominance. The UK's economic collapse. The UK has been one of the most visible examples of Western decline. With Brexit, the British economy has faced severe disruptions, leading to increased poverty, homelessness, and a deteriorating standard of living. Once a colonial power that shaped much of the global order, the UK is now struggling with deep economic inequality and political instability. The rise of Brics, where countries like China and India now wield significant influence, stands in stark contrast to the UK's shrinking global role. The US homelessness crisis. The US, the world's largest economy, is grappling with an unprecedented homelessness crisis. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York have seen soaring homelessness rates, reflecting deep-rooted socio-economic inequalities. This internal decline contrasts sharply with the image of the US as a global leader, further undermining its moral authority on issues like democracy and human rights. Germany's recession and Europe's struggles. Europe's economic powerhouse, Germany, has slipped into recession, with slow growth and high inflation exacerbated by the Ukraine crisis. Europe's over-reliance on US-led security structures like NATO and its subordination to US foreign policy has left it vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. Meanwhile, Brics countries are rapidly developing alternative economic structures that reduce their dependence on Western economies. The implications for the US and NATO. The growing closeness between India and China within the Brics framework has profound implications for the US and its NATO allies. The possibility of India, China, and Russia forging a stronger partnership through Brics could shift the global balance of power, reducing the influence of Western-dominated institutions like NATO, the IMF, and the World Bank. End of US-led NATO's dominance. As Brics nations strengthen their military and economic ties, the dominance of NATO is likely to diminish. India and China's shared opposition to Western military interventions and their increasing focus on multilateral security arrangements, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, are creating alternatives to NATO's security framework. Collapse of Western economic models. The Western economic model, which is based on neoliberal principles, military interventions, and the dominance of the US dollar, is increasingly being challenged by Brics countries. The Global South, particularly Brics members, is now seeking a more just and equitable economic order, where their voices are heard and their interests are prioritized. The collapse of Western economies, especially in Europe, is accelerating this shift toward multipolarity. Conclusion: India and China in a new world order. The BRICS Union has been a crucial catalyst in fostering a new era of cooperation between India and China. While historical grievances and ongoing border disputes still pose challenges, the broader geopolitical and economic dynamics are pushing both countries toward a more pragmatic and collaborative relationship. The decline of Western hegemony, exacerbated by economic crises and the growing irrelevance of institutions like NATO, is reshaping the global order. India and China, through BRICS, are positioning themselves as key players in this emerging multipolar world, where Western influence is waning and new centers of power are rising. The end of the US-led NATO's dominance and the collapse of Western economic models are no longer far-off possibilities. They are already unfolding. As the BRICS alliance strengthens, it is poised to play a transformative role in shaping a new global order, where emerging powers like India and China can assert their sovereignty and pursue their interests without being subject to Western dictates. The rekindling of India-China ties through BRICS signals a broader trend of Asian resurgence. Both nations, with their vast populations, economic might, and cultural legacies, are charting a course that challenges centuries of Western dominance. While differences between the two countries remain, the BRICS platform offers a path to managing conflicts diplomatically, cooperating on mutual interests, and collectively resisting Western hegemony. As the US and its allies grapple with internal decline and external challenges, India and China, two historic civilizations now finding common ground, are leading the way toward a more balanced, multipolar world. For the US and NATO, this marks a significant shift. Their unchallenged reign over global affairs is coming to an end, and the future belongs to those nations willing to collaborate in shaping a more equitable global system. BRICS, and the renewed India-China partnership within it, stands as a testament to this new reality, offering an alternative vision to the Western-led order that is fast fading into history.